So, hello everybody, and welcome to another interview around the PhD journey. So this is a series of short kind of interviews that I'm doing with researchers that I know. And today I'm joined by Dr. Bethan Taylor. So Bethan is a qualitative researcher whose research focuses on issues of power and powerlessness. With a background in practice and 15 years of experience of volunteering and working with children and young people. Bethan joined the Safer Young Lives Research Centre in January 2024 to lead on the work with the Young Researchers Advisory Panel. And Bethan's doctoral research explored lived culture in a support service for sex working women, focusing on experiences of power and powerlessness within the service and reflecting on the practices of service providers and how these aligned or conflicted with the service's written ethos, which sounds really interesting. I'm sure we're going to delve into that a little bit more. Bethan, welcome to this. Not sure what it is. It's not a podcast, a webinar, something.
Well, thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. So, maybe just to start us off then, since we're going to be talking about the PhD journey, can you tell us a little bit about what led you to kind of undertake a PhD in the first place?
Yeah, I can. So I'd finished my undergrad, and just finished my undergrad, and I had a really great supervisor for my undergrad. I can't even remember what it's called now. Is it your thesis at the end? What do you call it at the end? Your dissertation
The
at the end of your
dissertation, yeah.
undergrad. Feels like a long time ago. And the university, I was at the University of Huddersfield, so not particularly well known, but great uni. And they had a scholarship at the time where if you got a first in your undergrad, then you could do a fee waived master's or a PhD. And so it was my undergrad supervisor who rang me when I got my, I think before I got my dissertation results, or to kind of say, you're on the track for this. If you do end up getting a first, I think you should really consider doing some postgrad work. And then the conversation was kind of around, well, if I do a PhD rather than a master's, I get more for free. It's the honest truth of it. And I had something that I wanted to research at the time, and I was really conscious that I didn't know if I'd get it funded in the future. And I think I was at a position at that point in time that I could do a fee waived PhD where I wasn't necessarily being paid for the role. Definitely couldn't do that now. So, and I really liked research. My dissertation showed me that I really liked research, so I decided to go for it.
I mean, that's amazing. Where is this fee waived PhD you think you can do? I'm sure that doesn't exist anymore.
I wanted to look actually recently whether, because I'm pretty sure our vice chancellor at the time, or like some kind of honorary academic role, was Patrick Stewart, because he went to the uni and it was his scholarship. So I don't think it does exist anymore. But yeah, it was definitely, that was the draw to doing it, and I hadn't thought about it before my supervisor suggested it.
That's really interesting. So when I was doing my PhD, I had done my undergrad and I got supported by my tutors to kind of go on to do a PhD. So it wasn't in my mind as well. So sometimes like having that kind of mentor or supportive person that kind of shows you as an avenue to take, and if someone's going to pay for it as well, it's kind of like why would you not do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. So what inspired you then? Could you just a little bit about your research topic and then what inspired you to do that research?
Yeah, it's a complicated answer for why I decided to do it, but I was looking at support services for sex working women. And at the time, in all honesty, I went into that. I was quite religious at the time, and I think probably had some ideas of, I think I probably came from a bit of a rescue culture approach at the time, which is really interesting because I came out the other side of my PhD feeling completely differently about the topic that I was studying, and also about whether I was needed in the space to actually be a researcher in that space. So it was partly that led me to, well, it was really solely that led me to research it. And I then went and did, I think I did about 18 months. It was ethnographic. So I went in and did some observations in a support service, which is a wonderful support service in the north of England, and then did some interviews in that service as well. probably woefully underprepared for what I was going to hear, and went in quite naive and sheltered. Learned a lot of things, some at the time that I wish I hadn't learned. Probably could have put some more in terms of research or well-being for sure. But yeah, that was my. What was the rest of your question, Peter? About what
Just
the research topic
what it
was?
was, and then and what inspired you to research it.
Yeah, that's probably the full answer, really. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, and something we don't always talk about often is how the research then impacted you while you were completing it and kind of changed your views, I suppose, on that
Yeah.
particular topic. But maybe it sounds like in other ways as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I went in, and I mean, sex work and sex work research is still a fairly contested space, and it's quite sort of binary in terms of where people land on it. I definitely went in at one end of the binary, feeling like this is solely oppressive. We need to go in and rescue people out of this. And then met a whole host of people who knew way more about it than me, considering I was the person that was supposed to be going in and researching this. And actually came out the other end, which I might be skipping ahead questions, but thinking, this is a space that I have come into that actually I'm not needed in. And the kind of lesson at the end of my PhD journey was to step back from that space. So I don't actually research sex work anymore, because there are a wealth of very competent researchers, and a lot of them with lived experience of sex work. So not what I thought would happen when I started the journey. And there are definitely bits and pieces that I like, core topics that came up that were not necessarily specifically about sex work, but about support and support culture, that are the things that have stuck with me, that I've taken through, which I didn't realize until maybe, I can't remember how long ago I did my finish my PhD now, maybe 5, 6 years ago. But it wasn't until maybe the last couple of years that I can see those threads and that I've carried them through. I think I sort of just thought, well, I did that. It wasn't particularly relevant to what I've done moving forward, but it gave me a lot of research skills, when actually those issues of power and powerlessness, it's a whole findings chapter of my PhD. It's definitely the stronger findings chapter of my PhD. That is the stuff that I've still carried through with me. So it might not be the overall topic, but it's not all disappeared.
I don't know how much you realize how refreshing it is to hear somebody say, I removed myself from a research space because there was other people doing that work much better than I
Oh,
could because
so
of
much
that.
better.
Yeah.
I just was, there was nothing about me being in that space that was adding anything. I think what I realized is I went in with my own agenda, which we all do to some extent, but I went in with an agenda. It's everything that we talk about when we talk about doing ethical, and my research now is pretty much solely participatory. That's my focus. It was very much the opposite of that. I didn't really know anything about the group that I was going and trying to learn about. It was quite extractive. It didn't end up being that. I kind of went in with that approach. So actually, it's not really something it's kind of occurring to me now how grateful I am to have that sort of kick up the backside, really, and to go in and I think that experience challenged me and my naivety and my ideas of like how I was needed in the space and all those sorts of things that I maybe wouldn't have experienced if I'd not done the research and actually met people and heard their stories, and gone to conferences as well, and to like launches of sex work researcher hub books and things, where I was like, this is already happening. I'm not changing the world by coming in here, which I definitely thought I was going to when I started.
And there's something for me around that idea of like our intentions versus
Mm,
the actual impact of what it is that we're doing. And it sounds like there was like, yeah, a revelation there for you is going
yeah,
through that process. And also that you've then used that experience to then inform your research practice going
yeah,
forward so that you're not doing what you would.
Yeah, very much a little bit like, let's not do this again. And it's not, when I look back, it's not like, it's almost the reverse of how we often think of intention and impact in research, in that we often go in with really good intentions and our impact is really negative and extractive and damaging. I think I went in with what I would now say are not the right they were coming from a good place, but it isn't how I approach research now, and I'd definitely go in with a different intention. But actually, because I was in the space for such a long time as a volunteer researcher, the impact, I think, truthfully, was probably very minimal. It's not like there was a significant positive impact. I think I probably went in, spent 18 months there, and then had a really good relationship with the service and lots of women in the service by the end of it. I think the best thing that came out of it for them was probably just my time volunteering, rather than anything that actually came of the research. For me, I got a PhD out of it. So actually, the impact was still better for me than it was for the service and the people in it. And I guess that was one thing that I experienced as I was going about trying to get consent, and which is a very chaotic process sometimes, that the priorities that I had and what I thought was important about, like, oh, we're going to impact policy and practice, which truthfully, as like I don't know how old I was, 21-year-old PhD student who didn't know anything about the sector, I was never going to do that. I just thought I was. But even if I had done that, the women I was speaking to really couldn't care less. That like very much told me that that wasn't their priority or on their radar. It was just nice to be sat in a warm room and to have biscuits for like an hour while we chatted. So I think, yeah, the intention and impact stuff is interesting, because I think it didn't have like a hugely negative impact, but it probably had quite a neutral one.
And neutral in terms of maybe that group of people and that kind of topic, but a big impact on you, and then on the future research that you've kind of decided to undertake, and the way you
that's
approach
true.
it. So
I suppose if you look at it as like an overall, hopefully there's some good that I'm putting back into the world as a result of that experience.
Absolutely. So, your tips might be different from other people's then, maybe potentially, but I'm wondering whether anyone who's currently undertaking a PhD or a doctorate, probably qualitative, I imagine, might be people who are watching this. Have you got any tips for anybody who is kind of in the middle of, or thinking about taking a PhD, and how to kind of get into it?
I mean, I suppose they'd be different for the different stages. For people thinking about it, I am like a real advocate now for a different approach to what I did. And it's strange because I don't regret it, because it meant that I was able to get a PhD quite young, and then it affected my career trajectory, although it took a little while, longer than I thought it would. But I would advocate now for, I think the strongest PhDs are people that have worked in a sector in some capacity, and that the research idea has been born out of that, and a gap that they can see, which is not necessarily what I did. Mine was, I would probably now call it research for research's sake, which isn't the worst thing in the world, as long as it's not like really negatively impactful, but it doesn't have the impact and the significance that other people's PhDs do, that I know of, who've like been in a sector and have seen an issue and then have wanted to do something about that. So I think I would advocate for going and working outside of academia for a bit before doing a PhD, which is not like, it's not going to be everybody's choice or journey, but I think those are the really strong PhDs. And then they're so connected to practice and to frontline and to the difference that people want to make. If you're partway through, I took a break for 3 to 6 months, which I forgot that I'd done actually, halfway through my PhD, because I just became really overwhelmed and was just like, I don't actually know if I can finish this. I was hearing some pretty horrific stories that was like nothing I'd ever heard before, and I didn't know what to do with them. The conversation around researcher wellbeing wasn't that long ago, but that conversation wasn't where it is now. And so I thought I was just supposed to, especially because I was young and I wanted to prove myself, I thought I was just supposed to deal with it. So maybe that's a bit of advice, is being honest about the impact that it's having on you makes you a stronger researcher, not a weaker one. And it can only be a positive thing for your research to say, like, I need a break, or I need some clinical supervision, I need to talk to some people about this, I need to approach this differently. Like, your well-being is significant and important in that research space, and also better for the people participating in your work if you're also taking care of your well-being. The other thing I'd say, which is like a really specific thing, is I spent so much time terrified of my viva and seeing it as like a test, which I know that in some ways it is. But when it actually came to it, so much that I'd agonized over, I was just absolutely petrified they were going to ask me about my ontological and epistemological assumptions and positions. And I'd sort of half like made that up because I didn't really understand what it meant at the time. And I was so worried they were going to ask me about it. Nobody did. What I'd said was satisfactory. But I also realized partway through the conversation, partway through the viva, that the people that were examining me, at least one of them was like an expert in the field that I would have loved to have a discussion with any other time. And there was stuff she really loved about my research. And so a lot of it was actually just a really wonderful conversation where she was saying, okay, what about this? And maybe you could add this in as well. And I think if I'd have been able to, who knows whether I would have done, but if I'd been able to go into it as this is like a really exciting conversation to have, and this is about experts in the field supporting your work to be even better, rather than if somebody says something that you've missed, then it's all bad and all wrong and you're rubbish and you shouldn't have done it, and all those sorts of things, that maybe I wouldn't have spent so long panicking over it. And maybe also it's normal to fall asleep at your desk when you're writing your methodology chapter, is another thing that I would say.
Unless you're a methodology geek, you know, in which case...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think the stuff I write now, I think I'd find super interesting, but yeah, maybe it wasn't the methodology chapter. Maybe it was just generally falling asleep at my desk.
Because you were exhausted from the process. Yeah. There's loads of things in there that I want to pick up on. The first thing I was thinking about was, I'm glad that you had that experience at Viva. I know not everybody has that experience. So I think that your experience is what it should be, like colleagues talking about the topic that they're interested in.
Oh, it was mixed. I make
okay.
it sound like that. I would say it was split 50-50 between my two examiners.
Okay.
But I won't say too much in case they're watching.
Well, I get that then you probably had some challenging moments in your Viva as well, yeah. Then. And you know, as it should be in a way, you know, because it is an examination, but at the same time, it is supposed to be a supportive discussion as well about the work that you've done. So the other thing I was going to pick up on was you were talking about like the emotional impact on yourself. And I think that's something that still doesn't always get talked about enough. I kind of offer external supervision now to people in emotionally demanding roles, but also researchers as well. And one of the things that I hear quite a lot is actually there isn't really any space in the research process to kind of talk about some of that stuff. And it goes back to that conversation you were having before around the idea of if we're a research and we think we're just extracting data and information, then we're going to approach it thinking, well, this isn't going to affect me. I'm an analytical researcher. I'm just extracting this information, then I'm going to go and write it up. But actually, that's not really what's happening. We're in relationship with our participants at all different stages, from before we meet them to when we meet them and afterwards. And that actually there is always going to be an impact, and sometimes it'll be surprising in terms of how it impacts us because we don't know until it happens.
Yeah, and there's so many things now that I would put in place that if I'm supervising or line managing a team who are going and doing research, I think sometimes I will go the opposite end and offer them everything, still like giving them agency, that some people just don't need it, and that's fine. Some people aren't impacted, and that's fine. Sometimes we're impacted by the things we don't expect to be. That's one thing that I experienced. It wasn't always like the worst or most graphic stories. Sometimes it was ones where there was like a point of relevance to my life, or someone was the same age, or they'd mentioned someone who had the same name as one of my friends, that just made it feel very close to home, and then that had the impact. But in terms of not having spaces, I know for me, my supervision, so I had 2 supervisors who were both wonderful people, but I was working primarily from home. So I only really went in maybe once a month, every other month. And there's something about that, which I imagine more and more people are doing that now, where really thankfully, my mum is in academia, so became like an unofficial 3rd supervisor, which I think I thanked her for in my PhD. So there was someone there who got it, who I couldn't share everything with because she wasn't actually part of my advisory team, but I could talk about it. But I think what ends up happening is, if you don't have the spaces, the stuff comes out in quite inappropriate spaces. So I know for me, there was a particular time that I'm not very proud of, but being at a dinner party and starting to talk about a topic that was completely like freaked everybody out, but it was just, there was so much that was building up that it just spilled over. Or my poor husband would get home from work and I would just like talk through everything. And normally that was just what I'd written in a chapter or something, but just talk through everything that had happened in that day. So I guess that's another tip for people that are doing this from home, is being intentional about planning in those spaces are even more important than when you're meeting people in person, because you will, if you're in a PhD office with people, you will naturally chat through the stuff that's difficult, or someone might like put their head in their hands and their head on the desk and you realize that they're like not doing okay. But especially when you're doing this from home, plan those opportunities in, even if you don't think you'll need them. Like debriefing should just be a thing that we're doing all of the time, because it's good for our research and it's good for us. But I didn't have any of that really. I didn't plan in any of that.
And I feel like, listening to you, I feel like you're putting all the ownership on you there to manage your journey. And I'm like, if as a novice researcher, and you're saying you didn't have that practice experience beforehand, you might not know how things are going to
You're
affect
absolutely
you.
right. Yeah.
So I'll push it back to supervisors to start thinking about how you're supporting your students. And if you can't offer them that debrief space, which I hope most supervisors would be able to, but if you can't for whatever reason, what other support is available to that student to kind of support them with that process?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is something that actually happens a lot that is problematic, is we make it like the individual responsibility rather than like a structural, what are we putting in place for all our students?
Particularly in academia, where it almost feels like sometimes it's this unspoken rite of passage where, well, I had to go through this, so you have to fight, and this has to be really hard, and you have to just soldier on through. And that when you get your PhD, that means you've managed to get through all of that adversity. And it's like, well, actually, we could make this process easier in terms of not academically, but easier in terms of emotionally and the support that people are offered, because so many people drop out of doing their PhD. And you know, loads of different reasons for that, but one of them I imagine might be the emotional impact of some of the topics. Is there anything else you wanted to say about the process of completing your PhD? Any you talked about some of the challenges, any of the nice memories that happened? Do you have any?
It definitely gave me like a love of writing academically, and I would probably like approach that slightly differently now. I kind of I'm just airing all my dirty laundry, aren't I kind of enjoyed the feeling of like I don't know, the academic style of writing, where initially where it's like, this isn't going to make sense to everyone, I'm now like, that's a horrible approach, don't do that, Bethan. But I do like writing, and it is my partner is a creative, and I think for a long time I didn't see myself as one, and I have realized fairly recently doing qualitative research requires a lot of creativity, and the process of analysis I love. I love that. I love the thinking through it and seeing patterns in different transcripts or whatever else it is that you're using, or images, and like learning what my process is with that, and the fact that I'll almost see it in shapes and those sorts of things. It's definitely like that is my flow state. And I have lots of friends who talk about what they feel like before they do an audition, or before they go on stage. And it was yesterday that I realized it's very nerdy, but I'm happy with that. I feel that way about writing. And when there's something that I don't get and I can see like there's something in this, I'm looking at 5 different transcripts and there's a thread, but I haven't got to it yet, or there's like a theme that I can't quite get to the name because it's just not there yet, and digging through that, and then the feeling that you have when you get there, that is definitely my flow state and the thing that I love doing. And I think I've finally been able to embrace that is a creative process, which isn't usually a word that I think we use around research, particularly if it's like, if we're using like photo elicitation or something, we might call it creative. But I think all of it is. I think if you're looking at survey data, or all of that requires a creative thought process that I really enjoy. And it was doing my PhD journey that showed me that that's what I enjoy doing, that I actually enjoy the research process itself, and the idea of learning about something that we don't understand yet, or addressing a problem through research. Yeah, I really enjoy all of that stuff.
I love that. And I love that you were able to find that as part of the research process as well. You know, when I was doing mine, I fell out of love with writing while I was doing mine. So I had the opposite experience.
Yeah.
I was trying to work full time and write, and I didn't have the space to do it properly. And it's only
Yeah.
since now working in academia, and now I give myself the space to write, that I feel that what you're talking about now. I
Yeah.
feel that. So it sounds like I'm glad that you had that experience as part of your PhD.
That's interesting as well. You're talking about working full time, and I don't know whether you were working in academia, but I wasn't. So while I was doing my PhD, I was working for like youth work organisations and doing support work. And towards the end of my PhD, I realised that I actually couldn't hold that and do the research that I was doing at the same time. So for like the last year or so, because I think it took me 4 years to finish my PhD. The last year of that, I went and worked for an audiovisual company, and please tell me if my Wi-Fi is bad, by the way, because I've just seen a thing that says I've got low bandwidth.
I can still hear you. I think it went a little bit blurry, but I could still hear you fine.
Okay. So I was working for an audiovisual company doing marketing, which makes me laugh now because I have no skill set in marketing at all. But it was so different to my PhD that actually I don't think I could have been able to do a job that was like required of me to give in the same way that support roles do. Or if I was writing for something else or in academia, it had to be really different. So I could go do my job, leave, I didn't take any of it home, and then doing writing my PhD actually was they felt like a break from each other, was the way that I managed to get through it.
It sounds like a nice balance, and I get that idea of doing something completely different away from the topic, so that it's kind of not overwhelming. I was working as a social worker at the time, so I wasn't in academia, and I mean it was very different
But
in
still
terms of
heavy though.
it was heavy, and I know that
Yeah.
impacted the quality of the writing that I was able to produce at the end of it. Yeah, which was frustrating for me, but also I've kind of let that go in terms of I did the best that I could at the
Yeah.
time, you know. And some people, you know, don't have that option to kind of work part time, or give up work or whatever it is, you know, to kind of get that completed. So yeah, it's interesting we've had those different processes as part of
Yeah.
as part of our PhDs. So that was your PhD process. I'm wondering, where are you now in terms of your career and then your relationship to research as well?
So I took a bit of a detour. After I finished my PhD, I went back into practice, and I worked for Frontline Domestic Abuse Service for 3.5 years, and then hit a bit of a ceiling on doing that kind of work. So I went back into, well, I kind of did a research in practice. I worked for SafeLives, which is a national domestic abuse charity, but not frontline. So I was part of their research team, which for me was like a real sweet spot of, I was really connected to practice, and I could kind of use the insight from having been a frontline DA support worker, but also still got to do the research side of things. I'm now working for Bedfordshire Uni in their Safer Young Lives Research Centre. So they focus primarily on research around child sexual exploitation and abuse, but they are also increasingly, it's like wider experiences of harm as well. So I run what's called our Young Researchers Advisory Panel, which you mentioned right at the start, which is young people with lived experience of the issues that we're studying that consult on the research. And wonderfully, I've been brought in on a piece of funding that means that I get to train and facilitate them to decide a research topic that they want to study, and then to help them deliver whatever that research project looks like. So we're in the recruitment stage at the moment for young people. And again, I suppose I didn't know when I started out in research that there were such practice-focused research roles, or research roles where I would get to work directly with young people for a longer period of time, rather than just those that were taking part in interviews or things. So I'm glad that I did the sort of wiggly journey that I did, and did my PhD and then came out of academia for a bit. I did do a short-term research assistant post that was around researcher wellbeing right at the start of that journey as well. And I think at the time when I was in it, I was just doing the jobs that were available. I just needed enough money to pay rent. And it was really hard to get academic jobs and to get research posts. So I did the jobs that were available and that I had the skill set to do. But looking back, there's a very clear thread through it that has led me to the point that I'm at now. And there was a time, I think we were talking about this before we started recording, there was a time where I couldn't really see what the value was in my PhD or why I'd done it. Sort of felt like, well, if I was going to go back into practice anyway, what was the significance of that? But I can very much see now that I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in. But I also am grateful for having both of those lenses of practice and academia, and I wouldn't shift the journey. Would maybe take out the section where I was doing some like a horrible temp job for a bit right after I did my PhD, working in a cupboard. But aside from that, I think I couldn't see it at the time, but it definitely has been, it started that whole process for me.
It sounds interesting to me. It almost was like you kind of did the research and then almost like took a break from it, and then kind of came back round again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm also, I suppose, wanted to ask a little bit about the participatory action research, which I feel like you're really involved with at the moment, and I'm just wondering how that's going. And could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Interestingly, this again might come across as very incompetent in what I do. I'm writing some training at the moment on how to do participatory research with a team around childhood sexual violence, and there's a section in my module that I'm writing on participatory action research, and it's made me realize that I've never actually been trained in doing participatory action research, and I may have done it, and this is one of the things that I've experienced leaving academia after my PhD and having done that straight from undergrad, so not having done a lot of research projects, going into practice, then doing research in practice. There's a lot of stuff that I've done that I don't know the name for, or that you just end up coming back into academia and realizing, oh, I've been using a trauma-informed approach and it's been underpinned by a youth work lens. And all of this different language that academia has for the stuff that you just do when you're in practice and when you're working with young people. So I don't know if what I'm doing is participatory action research, but I know that in terms of that overlap of data collection and analysis and implementation, that space where what you're doing is trying to change and to affect change all the way through, knowing the group of young people that we've already got that we're going to be adding to, that will be the approach, because they have no interest in research, and what they want to do is see change and want to make a difference as much as they possibly can. So there will be an approach that's akin to that, but someone might have to train me in how to actually follow the steps of PAR before I implement it.
Bethan, I love your honesty. I feel like loads of researchers do that, like they actually learn by doing it, and then
Yeah.
it's afterwards that they then put it in a academic framework when they write it up or
Oh yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
I definitely had that experience of applying for this role thinking, oh, have I done any participatory research? And then talking to other friends in academia about it, who've like, haven't you been, for like the last 2 years, you've been working with a group of young people who have not only been delivering the research and being trained up to do that, but they've also been the ones that have been deciding what the topics are, and then you've been facilitating that. And I was like, oh yeah, I've been doing that, but I don't know whether I know what participatory research is. That in itself is an interesting thing for me. The stuff that it's hard, I think, to come back into academia from practice and feel like an expert, because a lot of you don't have a lot of the language that you might have otherwise, and you know how to do the doing of it, which is probably more important. But knowing how to teach that or talk about what it is that you're doing isn't necessarily there.
But for me, that's just the labels that we're putting on things. And also, I think people watching, maybe who aren't familiar with research, listen to you explain what you were doing on a project, and we'll be able to absolutely get that. But if we just say you're doing participatory action research, people are like, oh gosh, it sounds really complex. Like, what is that? How would we ever do that? So I think sometimes the labels can help, but only if we all know what they mean,
Yeah. And I think especially because most of the research that I've done is with young people, is participatory research with young people. Actually, those big confusing labels, we just don't use them because they're really hard to access. So even if I'm training young people up on this stuff, I'm often not using that language anyway, or I'm saying this is called this, but it actually means this. And then sometimes you feel like this is an entirely different conversation, but feel like you sit in the space between like the young people and practice and academia, where you're sort of a bridge between the two, but then going to a conference and having to like put the language around it can sometimes feel like you're not quite academic enough in those spaces, which is a journey that I'm on at the moment, working on that.
But for me, we need people who are bridging that gap, because otherwise there's just the gap,
Yeah.
and those two groups of people aren't communicating. So I think it's great work. I always love speaking to you and hearing about the projects that you're working on. What are your future plans? I assume to continue obviously with this role and complete this project. Yeah.
It's a good question. I've been thinking a lot recently. So one of my colleagues from the centre, she's been in research for a little while now. She's an incredibly accomplished researcher. Has done some amazing pieces of work around childhood sexual violence, loads of participatory work, but is going back into practice. So she's leaving training as an ISBA, an independent sexual violence advisor, and going into frontline practice. And I think all of us in the centre felt quite inspired by it, of looking at where are our links to practice, and because I sit in the applied social research centre, can it be applied if we've been out of it and been in academia for a certain length of time? So I'm actually been speaking to a youth club that is around the corner from where I live now, about going back in and doing some bits and pieces of work with them and volunteering with them. So the honest answer is I don't know, but my ultimate would be to always have a foot in academia and a foot in practice, so that they're both informing the other, and to keep exploring being creative in approaches. I'm interested in methodology and what's left that we haven't named in terms of methodology, and those creative processes and pattern finding are there ways that we can name that and then train people up in how to do that, not necessarily just within academia, but also lived experience panels that we've got, and experts by experience training them around those approaches as well. So we're not just training everyone in thematic analysis, which is what we tend to start with, which is a great approach and I love it, but the freedom to be creative in that is something I'm interested in. And there's loads of like different bits and pieces of research that I'd love to do that I don't know if I'll ever end up getting funding to do. So hopefully some of those will come to fruition.
Well, anyone watching who's got money, get in touch.
Yes, if you'd like to fund me to do some research around adolescent domestic abuse, I am here.
Bethan, that's been great. I think that might be a good place to kind of leave it for today. If people want to know more about your work, I presume they can go to your university profile.
Yes, yeah.
Which we can put the links to the show notes in
Yeah.
the show notes
And I
for this.
have LinkedIn. I'm not the best at updating it, but it is. I'm pretty sure my job stuff is up to date. I just need to get better at posting.
Yeah. Well, this will help. This you can add this.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. I'll watch it back first to see how much I say, and then put it on.
Thank you so much. And yeah, good luck with the rest of your research journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.